Okay, good morning, everyone. I apologise for the delay. We've had a number of technical issues this morning that we've had to resolve, but we are live now. We've got Jim in Victoria. I'm Sonia Mitchell from Corteva AgriScience and hosting this webinar with Jim. I'm super excited to have Jim here today. Many of you will have known him from his 35 years experience as a termite expert for CSIRO. He's also had about 20 years involvement with the Australian Standards Committee and has been a regular consultant and advisor to government and industry bodies over the last 3 to 4 decades, Jim. So we're delighted to have him here today. Can I ask all of you, if you have questions, to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen? And we'll move through those questions at the end of Jim's talk. So over to you, Jim. We look forward to hearing all about termites. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and good morning to you all. It's I'm not used to this technology, but I'm going to give it a go. But one thing I will start saying, and that is up front, that I've been asked to talk about baiting, but I'm not familiar with all the various baiting types. I'm just going to give you a brief spiel on the general concept of baiting. I will not be mentioning any trade names or the names of any active ingredients. It's just the general topic, baiting. But before we can talk about baiting, I want to give a very important run through of some of the statistics and so on with termites and some of their biology. It's so important to baiting that you have a bit of an understanding of the biology of termites. So I've got a list beside me. I don't want to miss anything. I hope I don't, but every now and again I'll be looking at that list to make sure I've said what I want to say. So briefly, biology of termites. What are termites? I guess we should all know by now they're social insects. They're what I've always called dwellers in the darkness. Why? Because you don't see them. They're hidden in their nest structures and so on. They are blind and they will avoid sunlight in most cases, and therefore given that they're in and can't be seen, they require a higher humidity. Now, the number of species in Australia, I might shock you, we have more than about 380 species. And most of them, please understand, most of them are beneficial to our environment by breaking down forest litter, tree stumps, recycling the nutrients back into the soil, and so on. So keep that in mind. Out of the 380, most of them are beneficial. In fact, you could almost say they're all beneficial, but there are a few, as I will mention shortly, that are not too beneficial. Now, the types of termites have been classified and grouped into a number of loose names. The main one that we would be associated, or you guys would be associated, are true subterranean termites. The name lets you know they are truly subterranean. They nest underground in most cases, although they can in some parts of Australia build an above ground mound. There are other species of termites, and including subterranean termites, that are tree-dwelling termites. But I put that one in there because there are many termites that do actually nest in trees and hardly ever venture into the soil. Dampwood termites is a classic example of termites that interact with fungal decay. Grass-feeding termites, which most of those 380 species, believe it or not, are grass-feeding termites throughout Australia, probably more in the subtropical to tropical regions of Australia. But there are many of them. There are others that you can call humic matter feeders, and ones that, believe it or not, love living and feeding on dung. It brings me back to my olden days of CSIRO, when I used to spend a lot of time in Kakadu National Park looking at buffalo dung for species of new termites that have not been described. Now, the number of species that are economically important to timbers in service are not 380, as I said, they're mostly beneficial. But around about 20 to 30 species are economically important. They belong mainly to subterranean termites, and you would hopefully would be very familiar with the genera names, and that's Coptotermes, a number of species. There's Shedrinotermes, a number of species. There's one species of Mastotermes, a number of species of Nasutitermes, and a number of species of Heterotermes. They're the main species of economic importance. Populations of a colony of termites, that varies depending on its age, size, species, and so on, but can often reach up to 1 million individuals. Now, termites consist of those million, if you use million as a number. The caste composition, when I say caste, what are they? It's just like other social insects. You're aware, I'm sure, that bees have workers. Well, so do termites. Most of the colony, at any one time, is probably about 95% workers. 5% of the colony members would be soldiers, and then you have the reproductives, which I'm sure you would know is the king and queen. How long do they live? Workers, we've always used a 2 to 3 year age on workers, but the queen in particular can live 25 years or more. She is just an egg-laying machine in many nests of termites. I might point out too, one of the interesting aspects of termites is a bit like what you've seen on the television about monkeys grooming each other. Termites often groom each other. They are very clean insects, so keep that in mind. Oh, one thing I should mention is how do they grow? Molting. They go through a number of stages of molting, just like a snake does. You've seen snakes molting on the television. So do termites to reach maturity. Now, what do economically important termites eat? Wood. Not just wood, but as I mentioned, grass and various other plant material. But the main thing they're looking for in wood, which is a name that I'm sure you've heard of, called cellulose. There's a lot of cellulose in wood, and that is the product that termites can break down into a food source only because they contain in their guts microbes. And you may have heard of the name protozoans and bacteria. What can economically important termites damage? Apart from wood that they consume, a lot of timbers and damaged trees and vegetables and so on, they can actually attack products which might surprise you, things like leather, plastic, bone. In fact, my first set of buffalo horns that I went up to in Kakadu National Park, I thought I'll take them home, only to find out that Mastotermes had got into it well before I arrived and consumed most of the underside. Linoleum, lagging around pipes, even lead. They've been known to gouge into soft lead, and there's a number of other things that termites can attack. Now, one of the very important aspects of biology of termites that is so important to baiting is foraging behaviour of termites. where the nest is located, and in many times you don't know where it's located, but if you do, you must understand that from the nest, which I often use the word colony, termites, to get to food sources to consume, radiate out from the colony in a network of galleries. When I say galleries, these are underground tunnels that are below the surface of the soil, usually in about the top 300 millimeters, but certainly some termites can go a lot deeper than that. Termites are known constant foragers. They constantly forage for food. You must keep that in mind. It branches, their foraging galleries branch, a bit like, I'm sure a lot of you have seen tree roots, how you have main stems from a tree and that branches out into smaller roots, and that then in turn branches out into smaller and so on. It's a network of galleries that are used by termites to constantly search for alternative food sources. Feeding throughout the colony, another part of biology of termites, are absolutely essential to understand when we're dealing with baiting. Feeding, a name called Trophallaxis. I will try not to use too many scientific terms, but Trophallaxis is basically the transfer of food and nutrients from termite to termite. It can occur from mouth to mouth, and it can also occur from anus to mouth. This is obviously pre-digested food that the workers can feed the colony with, particularly to the young castes, even the soldier caste, because the soldiers quite often have mandibles in the way of their mouth parts and that therefore have to be fed by the workers. Obviously, the king and queen have to be fed by the workers through Trophallaxis, and at certain times of the year, a number of reproductives are formed, and they will have to be fed at their early age. Grooming, I've mentioned. I don't think I want to say that anymore. Termites. It's interesting again to understand that termites are preferential feeders. There are certain timbers, certain products that they just love to eat before anything else. It's a bit like, and as I said to Sonia, it's a bit like if I offered you a prime cut of eye fillet steak and a bit of tough old barbecue macerated steak, what would you prefer? You're going to go for the eye fillet steak. I would at every time. So it's important to understand that some timbers are a lot more susceptible to consumption by termites than others, which are more durable. You may have noticed composite products that are used in new buildings today. When I say composite products, I mean particle board, masonite, and so on. For the first few years, if you do get termites into a building, they're not keen on eating the composite product. And you wonder why, because it's made of a very susceptible timber species. The fact is that there is glue in that product, and it's the glue that makes them repellent and will not consume that composite product for many years until it's aged and weathered and the glue vapors have dissipated from the product. I've had a question that I'll try and answer now. How much can economically important species of termites eat? How long until real damage occurs? I can never answer that question. That's one of the questions that I've been asked in my CSIRO career hundreds of times. I can never give an answer because there's too much variation, too many variables, the size of the colony, the maturity of the colony, the species of termite, the type of timber they're exposed to, and so on and so on. You can never really estimate, but a bit of a rule of mouth is if somebody did get an invasion by termites, subterranean termites, into a new home, they'll preferentially feed on the low durability timbers first, and you probably won't see much damage until a year or two after the fact, after the building, before you start seeing some quite substantial structural damage, or at least damage to your decorative timbers. Now, that's probably as much as I want to say about the biology, because I'll be coming back to this as I go through, just sloping through what actually is baiting. I struggled with how you would try to describe, because there are so many baiting methods. But to me, baiting is one of the more modern strategies in termite management, because it has been developed to eradicate entire colonies of damaging termites using only a small amount of active chemical, which often is of very low mammalian toxicity. Therefore can be considered a more environmentally friendly way of eradicating a termite colony. Now, I'm comparing it probably with the day when I first started CSIRO, where I was using and testing arsenic trioxide. I was testing different organochlorine soil treatments and so on. So this baiting today is one of those strategies now that's come through. It's like another arrow in your quiver. When I started CSIRO, there was, as a termite management system, there was basically only soil treatments. Now there's a multitude of them, and we're one of the lucky countries of the world that we've done so much research to get alternative strategies that overall can give you options for termite management. So that's basically how I would see baiting as a more modern strategy in the overall management of termites. In simple terms, I'm not going to try and do anything scientifically, but in simple terms, baiting involves the strategic placement around buildings and structures of vessels called bait stations. I've often called them feeding stations. And to some people in my family, I call them actually little restaurants, termite restaurants. I'll use bait stations more than anything. These bait stations have the ability to have baits placed inside, and the baits treated with an active chemical. And when these baits are discovered and subsequently consumed by termites, it can cause the entire colony to collapse. Now, I will flesh that out as we go through, but I will point out at this, right at this very early instance, there are some methods of baiting that will initially use highly susceptible timbers to aggregate termites into their bait stations, and only when there is termite activity will they remove or even keep it in, remove and then add the bait. And I'll come through as what's in the bait. It's like a fishing on a fishing hook. Bait is something that I will give you a lot more information about. Baiting can therefore be used to eradicate termites from an infested building, and is used quite often, not just here in Australia, but throughout the world. And when I say buildings, I mean buildings and structures. But baiting can also be used for the protection of buildings, like a strategy or defense around the perimeter of the building in the event that potential invasion by termites in the future. So keep that in mind. That's now that's available. So how does one install a baiting method? There are two main components, as I said, bait stations and the bait that you put inside it. Bait stations can be any form of commercially manufactured container or vessel that has a lid or cap to keep it dark. and keep the bait in. I used to use buckets and pails, ice cream containers, boxes, shoe boxes, goodness knows what. But there's, on the market today, there's a wealth of bait stations available, and I'm sure they're freely available, but you understand what a bait station is. As I say, I tend to use the analogy, it's like a little termite restaurant. It's like a little house. So if it's like a little house, the bait stations must be perforated, like us having a door, to allow entry by termites and exit by termites. Where do you install them? Well, obviously, most bait stations are intended, because we're dealing with subterranean termites, they're intended to be installed in the ground, but obviously close to the building or structure, or where termites may be considered posing a hazard, where they may be present. For instance, old dead tree stumps, sleeper retaining walls. And one of the worst I've found in my experience is, believe it or not, kids' cubbies. How many times do we see kid cubbies made of old containers of low durable timber, put out in the garden, no preservative treatment, left there for years, and termites love them. So, bait stations can be installed in the ground, but keep in mind there are also above ground bait stations that are modified for placement above ground inside a building. That's obviously where you're trying to eradicate a nest of termites or a termite infestation within an existing house. What is the bait? This crucial bait. A bait is basically a product based on cellulose, which is the main component of wood, which is highly susceptible and attractive to timbers. It can be formed into blocks, it can be used as a powder or a slurry, it can be used in any way, form or another. But it is highly attractive, and termites always, if you expose termites to it, particularly in the laboratory and as well in the field, they go mad on it. It's like that eye fillet steak. Excuse me, let me just have a drink. Now, in that bait is a mix, and it contains a non-repellent active ingredient or active chemical. Now, this is the crucial part. It can be a number of products. It can be a stomach toxicant. It can be a molting inhibitor. The thing about these actives is that they are very effective, and also they have a delayed action. That is so important. When I say a delayed action, when the bait is consumed, it takes a few days to become effective on the termites. So when installed, bait stations containing these attractive baits are provided they have been put in these special places where you may suspect termites have gained entry into a building or whatever. You do need to. Oh, I've lost myself here now. They are available to be discovered and consumed by foraging termites from the nest or colony, wherever it is. In most cases, you do not know where that colony is. You've got no idea where it is. So this is an indirect method of trying to eradicate a colony that you don't know where it is. So you're relying upon the foraging gallery network from the nest, the foraging termites, to discover, hopefully quickly, the bait that is contained in the bait station around the building, around a tree, or the cubby or the sleeper retaining wall. And once inside, they will continue to feed. Foraging termites don't just stay in the bait, or they will continue to feed on the bait, taking the bait back after consumption to the nest. More foragers come to replace those, and they're constantly, it's like a traffic jam, backwards and forwards to the nest, frequently returning to the nest to carry out their duties of feeding. One of the main duties of worker termites is feeding, of course. So not only do they feed fellow workers, but they will also feed others within the nest, such as I mentioned, the soldiers, as well as the reproductive king and queen. So the key objective with this baiting is to allow and encourage as much consumption of the baits by as many foraging termites as possible, so that the active chemical in the bait is transferred to all members of the colony by trophallaxis. That's by mouth to mouth, mouth to anus. That's the key objective. I know I've gone through it fast because I know there's a lot of questions will be waiting, but that's the main thing. You don't know where that nest is. I must admit, there are places in Australia where you may know where the nest is. It could be an above ground nest just outside your house in the front garden. And you can physically destroy it yourself. That's called the direct method of eradication. But in most cases, particularly down here in South, you don't know where the nest is. So baiting is an important part of indirect eradication of the nest. And once the nest has been eradicated, the pressure is off its destruction of timbers in buildings or even trees, vegetables, and so on. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but it's worthwhile just a few considerations that, as I said, you may need to have bait stations all around the building, particularly if you don't know or haven't got much idea of where termites are actually gaining entry to an infested building. You might only need to have it around one side of a building, around the perimeter. But you're not likely to get all bait stations intercepted by foraging termites from the hidden nest. But that's not essential. The main thing is that you can keep the termites feeding on the bait that contains that active ingredient and get it taken back to the nest where it is fed to all colony members. The amount also consider, don't forget, the amount of active chemical in each bait is concentration dependent, so that it is both effective and works and kills termites, as well as not exhibiting any repellents to their termite consumption. If it's repellent, it's not a good bait. They must not be able to feel that there is any repellency there and see it as a real good feast upon. Again, I'll stress again that the active chemical must be a delayed action initially, so that there's sufficient time for it to be consumed in the bait stations and then transported many times to feed as many termites within the entire colony. And as I said early on, there are many types of proprietary brand methods of baiting available. Some methods rely on highly susceptible timbers to attract termites, as I mentioned, in their bait stations, prior to the insertion of the bait containing the active ingredient. Whereas other methods merely confine only the bait within the bait station at the time of installation. That's a bit of a run through of baiting. It's worthwhile mentioning I've seen a few questions about aggregation. I see aggregation as something can complement the baiting procedures. Aggregation is a means of, or the way I see it and the way I use it in CSIRO, is a way of aggregating as many termites as possible to a point source, quite often close to the building. Now that doesn't go down well with the homeowner, of course. They want to see the end of termites, but bear in mind, the more termites you can aggregate, and then when you've got a lot of termites aggregated in a container, and I'll talk about a container in a minute, a different container this is, you can always then add a bait or 2 or 3 or 4 to it so that they can take the bait, the toxin, back to the nest. It's quite often useful when I said it's complementary, when it's proved challenging due to low numbers of termites in your existing baiting method. Sometimes pesties get very frustrated that they don't get much strike, or when they do get a strike, it's only low numbers and so on and so on. So it's worthwhile keeping that in mind, that aggregation is a wonderful thing to do. And I would urge you to go on the web and look at the CSIRO bait box. That's one of the most successful methods of aggregating termites I have ever used in the field. Purely how are we going? Time. Purely, it's one of those broccoli boxes that you see in the vegetable shops, polystyrene, a rectangular box with a lid. They're freely available for cooling vegetables and so on. It's a matter of drilling some holes through the polystyrene sides and bottom to allow access in and out by termites, digging a hole where you suspect there may be some termite activity leading into an infested house or near a tree. Perhaps lining the bottom of the hole that you've dug with some lovely susceptible timbers. Now, when I say susceptible timbers, I mean eucalypts of low durability. And one of the substrates that I have used is old fenced pilings. Ones we used to use many years ago were untreated, not like the preservative treated pine ones today, but the old eucalypt timbers, which are weathered and partially decayed. They are wonderful attraction substrates for subterranean termites. Line the bottom of the hole with that, put your box in, and then fill up your box with as many suitable lengths of that fence paling material, but stick it out. When I say stick it out, separated with very small strips of timber veneer, about the thickness of a lollipop stick and so on. Fill it up. Make sure the box it protrudes out over the top of the soil surface. Plenty of water, please. Water is a magnet to termites. Don't ever forget that. Not only is food so essential, water is so essential as well. Always make sure when you try to aggregate termites, you water the soil, you water the timbers. Now, when you put the lid on that aggregation box, quite often you need to inspection, and that's where all this baiting work and aggregation work, it must be carefully monitored. And you guys would know how often you need to monitor termites, but check. Aggregation is very, very complementary. Aggregate as many termites as you possibly can, but they must be of the species and obviously the same colony that may well be infesting the building that you're working on. So it's no use aggregating in the Pseudotermes termite if the termite responsible for the infestation is Coptotermes. have a look at that website. It's worthwhile having a good read of it and try it out yourself. I have found it extremely successful. But whilst talking about monitoring, that is probably one of the most important things of baiting. You don't just leave it there and forget about it, as you well know, guys. You need to carefully take caps off and look inside. And when you get a strike, you've got to monitor and carefully look at it, look at the bait, how much has been consumed. If it's all been consumed, put another one in. If it's partially been consumed, you may consider putting a new one in, and so on and so on. Baiting success is only as good as the monitoring by a competent person. And that's why I say a thorough knowledge of the biology of termites, not a thorough knowledge, but a knowledge of those aspects that I mentioned early on is so important with baiting. Your skills and so on. You really do know about the foraging behavior of termites, the grooming, the feeding, Trophallaxis, and so on. I urge you to read and get up to scratch with all that, because it really will help you in where to decide on where to put your bait stations and so on and so on. I don't know, is that a time to stop now, Sonia, or what?
We've had a few questions come in which follow on from your discussion, so it's possibly a good time to launch into those. A few have been texted to me and emailed to me, as well as via our Q&A function on the webinar. I'll start with the first one that was emailed through. I have a job site where we found signs of coptotermes, and they haven't taken to my above ground bait, and in fact are moving away from the bait. I put a few in-ground, always active bait stations around the side of the house, adjacent to where they were found inside the house, and got a hit on one of them in the garden. It's winter, so things are slow at the moment, but the pest manager is asking for direction of what's the best course of action now to try and eliminate that colony.
Yeah, I must admit, it is extremely cold at the moment. We're talking about a southern state, is that correct, Victoria? Yeah, it's very cold at the moment. You won't see a great deal of activity, but if you've got a strike, I'd build upon that strike quite personally. What was the, I've got questions, of course. What was the state of the bait inside? You know, was it mostly consumed, or was they only just scratching around it? But I would build upon that and consider even an aggregation trap close to that with a lot more timber. The more timber you can get close to bait stations, the better, in my opinion. And this is the thing, as I said, homeowners don't like you doing that. They hate it. When they ask, what are you doing? Oh, I'm putting some nice susceptible timbers to encourage termites. No, I don't want that, they say. But that's what you do want. You want to try and encourage as many termites as possible, particularly to go into your bait stations. And if you need to encourage that by placement of, or carefully burying some nice susceptible timber, and I'm talking, when I say susceptible timbers, I am talking low density eucalypts. If you're using a radiata pine, make sure it's the sapwood only, not the heartwood. But there's a number of timbers, believe it or not, one of the most expensive timbers, Oregon or Douglas fir is sometimes called, is a very susceptible timber when buried below ground. I'd be encouraging termites to come up to where that bait station is, so to really get it going. But it's very hard during the winter time. But I think I'd like to think that you'll get more activity as the warmer weather appears.
If I can flag something to everyone, it's very important for Jim to remain completely independent. He is not being engaged by Corteva AgriScience or promoting Centricon in any way. But if I'm allowed to be a little bit cheeky, Jim, there are a couple of follow-on questions in regard to the always active stations. So in this circumstance where the pest manager has got a very low population of termites, but he has had a hit in an always active station, would it be advisable to put in a second always active station along with an aggregation box as well to try and bring that low population to that site?
Absolutely. That's based on my experience. When you've got only a low hit, and I've seen that many a times, yes, build upon it. Try and aggregate close by. You'll be surprised how quick termites will find an aggregation box, like I mentioned, that broccoli box. It's staggering how quick you can do, particularly, and I'm talking more of the northern parts of Australia. Soon as I drop a pack of timber on the dry ground in Darwin, for instance, in hot, dry season in June, July, next day, termites are in it. I've even dropped concrete slabs on the ground, and overnight termites have thought, oh, that's timber that's dropped from the sky, from the trees, and they're up, and I move the slab, and there they are underneath the slab. Disappointed, the termites, by the way, they can't eat it. But yet termites move quickly. They are foraging through their network of galleries. You just can't see them. You see ants, true ants, all over the ground in summer, don't you? Well, basically termites are doing this underneath in their underground tunnels frequently. They're very active during the warmer months of the year.
I'm not sure if you would answer this question differently, but a question was asked, why would you aggregate then bait later when you can use always active baits that in effect seem to aggregate and bait in one step? Obviously, I agree with that, but with the question, but what I'm getting from you, Jim, is that they're complementary activities. So having, particularly where you have a low population, perhaps having an aggregation box and an always active bait kind of increases your chances of success. Is that right?
That's what I've always said, increase your chance of success. Your low hit may not be the result of them not liking the bait. It may be the result of termites from that colony, wherever it is, or nest, may have other food sources, like your next door neighbour or their kid's cubby. They could be feeding elsewhere and only recruiting smaller numbers to where you're trying to bait. So that's why I say aggregation does complement, but certainly if you can put some more baits, I must admit I've seen the always active, and there's certainly, from what I've seen, there's no repellency of the baits, so it's not as a result of repellency. It's a result of low numbers, and that can happen at any time, anywhere, probably any species of termite. But encourage as many termites as possible, because you want them to work for you, to consume the bait and take it back to the nest and feed their individuals, all individuals if possible, by Trophallaxis.
And just to follow on from our internal research that whatever and prior to that Dow AgroScience has found was that actually adding an additional station next to a hit station was actually more successful in leading to elimination than even those auxiliary stations that you might put in around damp areas, so around air conditioners and pipes and moisture zones. So, yeah.
Absolutely. More bait stations, the better. And particularly easy when it's being placed in perhaps a lawn just around the perimeter of the building, or a garden bed. Don't be frightened of putting more and more baits there. The more termites, the better. The more bait that is consumed by termites is better. That leads to your success.
We have a different question here. What is the importance of placing an above ground bait station directly on a termite feeding location within a building structure?
Oh, if you can guarantee that it hasn't been disturbed too much by the homeowner, and that's one of the problems. How many times do you get called to have a look at a house? Oh, there were termites there, so I used a fly spray. Now, but if you're a competent pest management technician and you do find some real activity, don't div around. Yes, strap on an above ground bait station as soon as possible. Make it dark, tape it up, whatever you need to do. You know, there's a lot of above ground techniques, but they can definitely work. I have used above ground bait stations in a place in Victoria called Lacola, and I'm not telling you what product it was, but gee, it does work. It really, really does work. So, but in some cases will not, because the disturbance of you trying to put that above ground station, they have gone elsewhere. But in some cases they'll come back. But as I said before, water is the magnet. Don't be skimpy on the water. They love water. I was making slurries and all sorts of things during my research days, as much water as possible.
Thank you. Another question is asking about a dual approach. So using in-ground stations around the outside of the house and using a different approach inside the house. What are your views when you've got a dust or foam of some sort inside the house and a baiting system on the outside of the house?
I personally am not keen on having a chemical option inside and a baiting option outside. You might be competing against each other, and that is the problem. I would focus on baiting or the foaming rather than both together. I don't mind them being separate times. You know, if you've failed at baiting or failed at the foaming, sure, but I'm never been keen on two together. If it's a non-chemical method, like the concrete slab being a termite barrier, that's fine with baiting. Perfect. You know, and this is the whole thing. We've got so many options these days in termite management. We are a very lucky country that we've got all these options, and we've come a long way from the days of organochlorines, which I started off with.
Another question from a pest manager who had a hit on a station by one species and then nothing for very many months, and now the same species has come back again.
To the same bait?
The same into the same station and the same species.
Right, so we don't know whether it's just the same colony.
Right.
that's not an easy one, quite honestly. Look, with that, you've got to persist. Assume there could be two colonies. Keep the baits up to it. Once you've got a hit, please don't go away and leave it. Say, oh, I'll come back in a few weeks and look at. Try and build upon it. Whether it's putting timber again around or more bait stations. Have half a dozen bait stations together if real need be. I know the cost increases, but you really got to make these bait stations, aggregation stations, attractive. It's got to be attractive so that termites want to feed there and stay there. If you've only got a small bit of wood, they're not going to stay there very long. But if you've got lots and lots of wood, wow. That's why I say these broccoli boxes full of fence piling sections worked magnificently. I only wish I'd taken videos of it and put on the web. They're magnificent, and they do often attract the economically important ones, coptotermes. They tend to love that weathered wood. So, but it doesn't have to be weathered wood. It can be unweathered wood, but long as it's of a very low durability and known to be highly susceptible to termites.
We've had a question regarding multi-nesters. Would your approach to baiting change, or is it simply a matter of persisting?
Multi-nesters?
Yes.
What do you mean? I'm not.
Termite species with multiple nests.
Yeah.
Does
Termite,
that change your approach to baiting?
termite. Now you're talking about different nests of termites.
A colony with multiple nests, I think,
Yeah.
is what is being asked.
Right. See, the nest I usually refer to as where the king and queen is within the colony. So you're talking about 2 or 3 different nests of termites on a property. No, I wouldn't change my attitude that you would still go through with the baiting method, and I don't see an issue there. You may be lucky enough to get a hit from one nest, maybe 2, and the other one maybe not. You may have to, it's constantly monitoring. I can't stress them even more. You must keep monitoring and try to understand that you just don't know from what nest those termites have come from. You really don't know. So, you know, hopefully you've got some termites, build upon it. If you've got another station that's got termites, assume that's a different nest, but it may not be. But keep the bait up to them, keep the food up to them so that they can consume as much as possible, and try to explain that to the homeowner. I've always had troubles with the homeowners. They don't like that. But you've got to explain it to them why it's so necessary to bring in or encourage as many termites as possible, so your chances of success are higher. That's so important.
We have another question regarding adding sugar to the water. You spoke a lot about how important moisture is when we're baiting termites. So the fellow has asked, I was taught with baiting, add sugar in the water. Is that beneficial or not required?
Not required. Through my CSIRO days, not just in my laboratory, but in other laboratories around the world who were also developing baiting strategies, that has been used and was found to be unnecessary. There's enough in the cellulose and water. Water is your attractant, not sugar. You don't need that.
Just from my experience, we've had some people swear by sugar water, some people swear by Gatorade.
Yeah.
And another fellow has said to me that he will only use local water. So particularly in regional and rural areas, rather than using town water that the termites may not be familiar with, that he uses water from the local properties. So whether that be rainwater or bore water or river water.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've got any comments regarding that, Jim.
Oh, I always avoided using the standard tap water because of the fluorine, chlorine, whatever's in it, which are detrimental to any insects. I would prefer to use tank water off the roof, distilled water, something like that, to avoid any form of chlorine or fluorine. But yeah, coming back to the sugar, look, if pesties believe it does give them a little bit better result, fine. I can't see it doing a great deal of harm, but these bait products have been researched so well that from my knowledge around the world, it was not really required. There's enough attractancy with the baits with water.
Yep. Yeah. I'm a fan of following science there. We've had another question about aggregation boxes. Somebody's using plastic storage boxes. Do you consider that to be an issue? Like, is there a big advantage in using polystyrene instead?
Oh, polystyrene, you can get it for nothing in most cases from a vegetable shop. Costs nothing. Good insulation properties. The only problem is if somebody stands on it, but that's why I say it should be a little bit proud from the surface so it can be seen, and you may need to protect it so that if somebody did stand on it, they didn't put their foot through it. That's the only advantage of those broccoli boxes. But any vessel, provided it's got access for termites in and out. I don't know how many metal piles, when I say piles, like metal buckets I've used aggregating Mastotermes in the Northern Territory. The only problem with metal is it rusts. So that's another advantage in polystyrene, it doesn't rust, but plastic is fine. And I guess that's why so many of these bait stations are made of plastic. So how are we going?
We've had another question about water, actually, whether it's an advantage to use warm water with the bait matrix, particularly in winter.
Warm water, yeah, I can't see the advantage in that, purely because it only remain warm for a short duration, probably a duration much shorter than the time taken for termites to forage and find and gain access to the bait station.
Fair enough. And I have one, again, I apologise, Jim, but it's a cheeky Centricon question. As you're aware, Centricon has been accredited for use in construction, but it is blatantly against the Australian standards to use what's considered to be a bait. I don't consider Always Active to be a bait as such. It's kind of a solid chemical or an active bait, different to what the Australian standards are referring to. But given we have this new technology and it's been used in Australia very successfully for the last 5 years, what are your thoughts about Always Active being used in construction, and is this a prompt for maybe updating the Australian standards?
Well, first of all, the word against, I'm totally against the word against. Standards have not said that. It's what standards has, and I know Don Hewitt's in the audience, so he's a chairperson, but it's baiting is not a deemed to satisfy solution in AS 3660 part 1. It's just not a deemed as, and it may well be one day, but it's not at present. Consequently, because I think the Standards Committee sat probably subsequent to, or no, well before baiting has really come through, the building code or National Construction Code have an alternative, can accept alternative solutions if it's not, if deemed to satisfy a solution in the standard. And I'm of the understanding that all the data that has been supplied, including the registration of Always Active, it has been deemed to comply with the National Construction Code, therefore it is an acceptable solution. That's my understanding, but I'm out of this business now, and I'll stay out of any politics or whatever, but my understanding that the data has been thoroughly assessed and accepted by a load of unknown experts to be an alternative solution to the deemed to satisfy solution in the standard. Therefore, it must have pretty good sound data to show that it works.
Okay, we have one last. Are you still there? Sorry, Jim. It's probably a question that needs to be answered offline. It's in relation to the use of Centricon in construction and difficulties in getting certifiers to accept the code mark certification, which is an issue that I'm very familiar with, which is why I posed the question, because obviously if we can update the Australian standards to the current technology, which, like, the Australian standards was written in 2014 and code mark accreditation for Centricon was achieved in 2016. So if we can update the Australian standards, obviously it'll make life a lot easier for a lot of pest managers and certifiers and builders and homeowners. Hence my question, but I'll respond to you directly, Pat, on that one, if I may. And I'll take this opportunity, since we're pretty much on an hour now, to thank you, Jim. It's such a privilege to have your 40 years experience shared with the industry, with pest managers across Australia. We really appreciate your time and the information that you've provided, the things that you've seen, which many of us will never have the opportunity to see. So it has been an absolute privilege, and we thank you immensely.
Thank you. Look, yeah, I must admit, in terms of baiting and termite management in general, yes, I've been extremely lucky to work and observe experimentation in the fields of so many countries, particularly America, particularly when baiting was really first starting to be tested in the laboratory and field. But throughout Southeast Asia and throughout Australia, I've been extremely lucky. I've got a wealth of experience, and I thank the Australian government for that. Yeah, look, I hope I haven't confused anybody with terminology or given enough information or whatever, but it is, baiting is a wonderful option. As I say, it's another arrow in the quiver. Again, we are lucky to have all these alternative options to have an overall termite management strategy for new buildings, buildings under construction, and existing buildings, of course. So, yeah, look, I appreciate having the opportunity. As I say, I'm unfamiliar with all this technology, but thank you very much, and thank you guys for listening in, and I wish you all very well for the future.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Okay.
Have a good day, everybody.
You,
Thanks for joining in.
okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.